If you're not here for the public information meeting, you're probably in the wrong place. I notice that the front seats are empty. I would say, what do you think, we're in church? But, well. So, I want to talk a little bit about the project in general. The city got involved October 2016, I believe, was one of our first meetings to talk about some of the concerns that people had in regards to several issues related to Stanley Street. First of all, before we get too far, this is being live streamed and recorded for those who may need to watch it again later. I want to point out that because state open meetings laws are very strict, we couldn't notice this as a council meeting because we would not have a quorum. Quorum is a specific number in the body, and we didn't have that. Some are on vacation or doing other things around town and couldn't make it. We're fortunate to have 2 of the 3 alders here for the Stanley Street area districts. Alderperson David Shore was unable to attend. He was out on business. And I asked him if he wanted to read anything. He didn't. He did submit an open letter, so you may be able to read that online for his opinion. We also have Alderperson Dugan and Alderperson Morrow here. We have Council President Melissa Johnson. So I want to make sure that it's not because they don't show up because they don't care. Every single one of them do care. It's just legally we can't have certain numbers. That's why we're recording it. So everybody will still be able to see this, and anyone will be able to go back and look as well if some of your neighbors couldn't make it. I know there were some meetings prior to the city getting involved. I am not here to speak about those. Those were private groups, private people doing their own meetings, but the city got involved in October of 2016. We took comments and brought those back. We then had another meeting in 2017 to see if things had changed, what was going on. I'm losing it here a little bit. Sorry, I got a bit of a sore throat, so the doctor's got me on meds and everything. But to, again, take testimony to find out what the problems are. And that's something that I've tried to do throughout my term as mayor, even as alderperson. Let me know what the problem is, and we will work together to try and find a solution. Don't give me a solution and then try and figure out what the problem is. So we took that testimony, and our director, Scott Badoon, who's here tonight, wasn't at the first meeting. Were you at the second one? Yeah. You were at the second one. He took all of that information back to his office. We compiled it and took into categories what some of the concerns were for those people who live on Stanley Street or off of Stanley Street, but use Stanley Street. He'll cover that in his presentation today. Then we took those concerns and tried to evaluate them. And we did traffic counts, speed data, crash data, and we'll cover all of that in the topics as well. That's all covered under Scott's presentation. And then he put together this PowerPoint, which is what you're going to see tonight. It's going to talk a little bit about the history of the project and where we went through, categorize those concerns that we took in from the previous public meetings that we had, and then offer some possible solutions to help address some of the concerns. I don't think there's one solution that's going to work for everything, but at some point, this is going to be coming to the council. Several alders had expressed interest in doing something to increase the safety and the usability of that road. And I promised Alderperson Shore that we would have something in front of council prior to the middle of May. So what we take tonight, the feedback that we have tonight, will ultimately then go to council sometime before mid-May, May 17th is I think the date we had discussed, to have a special meeting to talk about what we may want to do or not do to Stanley Street. What we're going to do is Director Badoon is going to give his presentation, and then I'm going to let the 2 alders for the district speak, and then we will take testimony from everyone else. That will go in an orderly fashion. Those people who live on Stanley Street, those people who live within a block of Stanley Street, and then finally everyone else. I would ask, because we've got a room full of people here tonight, that you try and limit your comments to about 5 minutes or so. I really not want to cut anybody off, because I know this is a very important issue to everybody in this room. So we want to get you the ability to say what you need to say, but we also need to be respectful of the time and everybody else that's attending. I would ask that you avoid getting into name calling or arguing or debates. When the speaker has the floor, let the person speak. If you don't agree with it, you would have your turn to speak, unless you spoke already, I guess. We're going to try and limit that to 1 time per person as well. Try and be respectful. We're all in this together. We're just trying to find the best solutions that will work in this Stanley Street corridor. So please be courteous and respectful to your fellow attendees, the alders, and especially myself and Director Badun. With that, Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I certainly appreciate it. It's nice to see so many people interested in what I have to talk about. I'm sure you didn't come to listen to me talk, but definitely this is important for you to do that if you actually did come to listen to me talk. I have a voice for radio, or a face for radio, a voice for newsprint. But I can't seem to get a job here with branding, so I'm stuck here. Just real quick here, just the agenda. Much of the mayor said, we'll go through introductions we've always done. I'll summarize the comments, go through really the evaluation that I did, and then touch on the recommendations. I have a lot of slides. I'll try to go through this quickly. I have to admit, maybe it'd be best to try to keep things moving. If people are a little bit lost, I'll try to look up. I'm an engineer. I like to look at my shoes a lot. But I'll try to look up if you're there, just maybe make a motion and look confused, and I'll try to slow up and touch on a few other things. So just a summary of operational issues. I kind of broke these up into 2 different things, thinking more of the traffic engineering aspect of things. There were a lot of opinions and stuff. Granted, a lot of people had stressed their thoughts on whether this may work, may not work, but really breaking it down and looking at the reoccurring themes to see what was presented to us. And one of the primary ones was just the frustration. People said it's difficult to get out there. If you're on a side street, you're in a driveway, you wait forever, you can't get out there. Other people just said that it may not be such all the time, but gosh, there are times a day when there is so much traffic out there, it's nearly impossible to get. Those lanes are full and people are moving. Then another one that was reoccurring, just the lack of alternative modes of transportation. People identified that there isn't sidewalk on both sides of Stanley Street through the corridor, and there aren't bicycle lanes there dedicated at the moment. So those are some of the operational issues that we brought forward, and really those were the operational issues when we kind of just weeded through what things were said. More was otherwise stated on the safety issues. There were several recurring things regarding the speed and people's perception of how fast people are traveling there. When it was kind of pinpointed that, there seemed to be more people identifying at green, and I think a lot of people had this idea between it's the differential speed. Some people brought up people coming into town were going faster than maybe people going out of town, so it's difficult to read people as they're traveling. Crossing. People just identified, no matter what mode of transportation, people seem to identify that it's difficult to cross as a vehicle, as a bicyclist, as a pedestrian, and they didn't necessarily feel safe in doing so. One thing that always came up was this deceiving, which lane are people in? It's a 4-lane highway. I don't necessarily know which lane they're traveling in, and it kind of confuses me. It makes it difficult. I'm not sure if I should cross or if I should enter traffic. The next one here, and I promise I won't read everything in these, but I think these are important, so hang with me on this one. There's perceivably dangerous intersections, and kind of look through what is. There are a number of intersections there. These are the ones that really came to the top, that were the reoccurring ones. Minnesota, Wilshire, and North Point were green. And then, bicycle safety was another one. There was different people talking about whether they should be on sidewalks, the safety of doing that, versus the operating of a bicycle, on Stanley Street itself. So those are really the issues when it's broken down that were brought forward that we're really trying to look into. These are what people like yourselves and some of you probably have presented to the city and said this is whatever we do we want addressed. So we took that and we started to look at some of the things in an engineering evaluation. And I really want to start here with a note to do this because this can easily, things I always say when you're looking at data and you're analyzing that, when you grab, any sort of data, and, everyone's probably seen this before, you get information and you can use it and spin it to whatever. We're trying to present this as factual as possible, as neutral as possible, but really this is an engineering evaluation. And this is really strictly looking at the traffic. We're identifying the road, how does that otherwise operate, how safe is it, and are those issues that you've identified, are they correctable specifically to the 4-3 lane conversion, as well as then looking to see what maybe else we can do, or what may be more appropriate. As well as then the thing is, I want to remind everyone that this isn't the definitive. Whatever the engineering comes out to on these specific topics isn't necessarily the end of the conversation. There are many other reasons why people, we make decisions on infrastructure improvements and those things, such as what I list here. So please do keep that in mind as we go through. To be honest with you, when I started this, the research that there isn't a whole lot of guidance out there. There's a lot of good information. They call them guides and stuff. They often talk about the benefits of doing, road diet. There's not so much information on, okay, so these are the benefits. How do you know if it's really a good fit? What will it do? So I kind of adapted this from several things of research to do this, to kind of come up with thought process we otherwise use here, looking at some of the issues, identifying and comparing that, looking at the road diet, and seeing if they could be corrected, then evaluating to see if that may actually be true, and then identifying what we would do from there. So we'll follow this, and you'll see this a few times through the presentation. So looking at this, what really are the road diet correctable problems, issues? And quite often you see that these are many of the same things that were identified in the issues at the beginning. Those minor street operations, getting into access to the street, crossing the street, travel speeds, how fast are people going? One thing that wasn't otherwise specific, but is definitely correctable, one of the probably the more prominent things are delays associated with left turns. Left turns are actually a big part of road diets. Safety issues. Safety issues are really all sorts of things. Crashes involving vehicles and pedestrians and bicycles, and any sort of safety concern there. As well as even some of the perceptions to think that do people feel safe in doing their crossing the street, operating their bicycle, driving just down the street. And then some other specific things relative to specific road diet correctable issues, related to such. And then just some of the other issues that otherwise have there, bicycle pedestrian accommodations where they may not be, and even aesthetic things, because there are some of those, other aspects that, road diets can always provide, benefits to a community. So what we're really going to look at is in part, like I said, it's the engineering aspect of things, so that comes predominantly the operational and safety issues that, like I said, again, those concerns. So this is really what we otherwise did and spent most of the time that we've been doing over the months to do this, is look at those side street operations. And in doing so, we did traffic counts at actually several intersections more than this. These are the ones we spent the most time at trying to collect the most data, because these were the ones that were brought up as being the greatest concern. Also, we talked to the police department. They helped us gather some speed information, as well as just fill us in on their thoughts and their experiences dealing with Stanley Street. And I also just took from that, especially while doing the traffic counts and other times throughout the year, just observing those left turn movements to see how does this street operate. What is traffic doing when they're using? What is a typical operator of a motor vehicle, doing when they're on Stanley Street? So with that, first thing, side street operations. One of the things that we looked at is the traffic signal warrant analysis. These are otherwise just kind of set up. These are very standardized approaches to it. With the traffic counts, you kind of just plug it into a worksheet, the information, and then you look at various factors that do that. So there are actually 9 different warrants, not all of which apply to Stanley Street. Some would have to do with like railroad crossings and other things like that. So those wouldn't necessarily pertain. But we looked at those that did. But otherwise, even a note with that, just because even if a warrant is met, excuse me, or even if warrants aren't met, doesn't necessarily see that you don't do or can't do a signal. It's really kind of a guideline to help you decide either whether you're going to do more evaluation, or whether really there is a significant enough problem that you really need to start taking action. Now you're more into the planning. So it can be the deciding factor, the decision maker, or it may just guide you to the level of effort, the analysis you do to making that decision. The first one that we looked at for signal warrants was Minnesota Avenue. This is just a schematic to look to see what it is. I think everyone's very familiar with it. There are some challenges, otherwise here, just as operators do, that don't get caught in signal warrants, which is the angle of the intersection that comes into play. This is actually just a summary of the traffic counts, and you see that. And I don't know if you others read the numbers and stuff. The important thing is to see that is the width of the band, as shown on the screen here, represents the percentages of traffic in that. So, for instance, looking at this, if you're looking at the green band. And if you can read the numbers, if you can't, I'll read them really quick. There's about 4,500 vehicles total passing through there. Now there's the smaller green band that is going up on the screen there. That's the right-hand turn. So of that 4,500, roughly a little over 700 of them made a right turn. Then there's the narrower band at the bottom. About 250 vehicles made a left turn. So that's really how this information is read, and this is important to us to help understand. Thanks, Mayor.
I like to serve.
To identify this, it's important how these, these intersections operate. And these counts are done. It's several days. We want to make sure we're not just picking, a bad day, a good day, however you might look at it to see that. So, they're looked at, several counts. I think actually we did a little bit longer. They're a minimum of 12 hours. We want to capture, of course, the peak hours, throughout the day and see that. So this establishes essentially, how these, again, typical, there may be days that may be different than this, throughout the year, but typically, how does it operate? And, what is traffic trying to do? And when we do that, we run through the warrants. This isn't the warrant spreadsheet, but this is just a summary, of which you see there's the different warrants and how the others compare. So, the bottom line, with Minnesota is that even if people have a perception that there's some difficulties there, quite honestly, the numbers don't otherwise identify that it would be, any more concerning than, another intersection. So it actually operates fairly well. And that, again, doesn't mean that at every instance in time, that it does. You may show up at a time when, there is, more traffic. It's that peak traffic, and things don't always work. Again, they said these just work on, the numbers that are always collected and essentially what happens, with those as they're analyzed in there. And it has to do with, those turning movements, pedestrian traffic, peak hour volumes in all directions, as well as average traffic, in directions and certain hourly breakdowns of traffic. So it does actually do a very thorough job of looking at it in different angles to see, or different perspectives to see how that intersection, may work. With that, it's in other words, say that this doesn't, in other words, tell us specifically, what the delay is at an intersection at any given time. To say that it really just is an indicator to see if whether delays are more likely to happen, or people are experiencing them and something needs to be done, or what sort of. It doesn't give us necessarily the level of service, but kind of gives us an indicator of what the level of service may be or how it may work out. But working through those indicators, nothing came to light to say that there's clearly an issue here. So this would otherwise be something that could be looked at further. Just to see if there are times, maybe it's more counts, whatever. But looking at it, it does operate adequately. But the other one we looked at that came up, for the most, and I should even have probably said before, the one thing that we're probably really not looking at here, which I know is a big thing for people, is Green Avenue, North Point and Green. And a big part of that is actually right now we're trying to sort out with the state exactly who has control over that. We don't have any documentation that says that we do yet. And they can't provide us any documentation saying that we do as a city, yet they're saying that they think we do. So, we're still trying to sort that out, but it's been the understanding that they had control. And up to a few weeks ago, they were also telling me that they had control of that intersection. So Wilshire, much the same thing. These are the traffic counts to see what it is, how traffic is flowing. The total numbers here are very comparable to Minnesota. And actually very interesting that, kind of the whole operations of the intersection are actually very similar to Minnesota. And again, it's an intersection there, very similar to Minnesota. 2 doesn't otherwise pass the warrants, doesn't satisfy any of the warrants. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean that, a signal is totally out of the question. It just seems to say that first indicator of pass-through that seems to indicate that nothing rises to the concern level to say that we need to take action, now. So next thing would be the speed data. Talking to the police department, they had some data, some reference to things like that. They gave us our thoughts on Stanley Street, as well as they put out their little radar guns to help us out with this. Specifically where they had others put them after I requested was near Indiana, kind of sort of in the middle of this corridor here between Michigan and North Fork, Wilshire area. And it was actually interesting what they came up with. The speed limit within there was 35 miles per hour. Based on the data that they collected, the average speed, and they're going both ways, was actually just slightly under, right around the speed limit. And the 85th percentile, which is in the traffic engineering world, is kind of one of those other thresholds. We're looking for 85% of the people are traveling at this speed or less. Try to give an idea of what the majority of traffic is using, and it's just slightly over the speed limit. And once again, these are some of the things we have some limited data. These are some of the things that could be done historically. They didn't have a lot of historical data to provide. The more of that was just anecdotal information that they had collected as they were out doing patrols and whatnot as far as that, or a number of responses to things like that, which they didn't indicate there were many. In that respect, to say that Stanley Street was, my own words, not theirs, to say like kind of on their radar as a problem issue that they monitor consistently. However, one of the interesting things, and you're always going to find people that do speed, pretty much no matter where you go, and even interesting to me was that in both directions, here the max speed that was identified was about 50 miles an hour. So definitely someone traveling at a faster rate of speed through that corridor. But what's otherwise been identified is definitely not the majority. The third thing in the operational is the left turn movements. And I said these were just kind of observations that were actually taken and calculated from the traffic counts at the intersections, as well as just kind of observed throughout the corridor. What we otherwise identified is that those left turn movements are low, and that is generally important for what I stated at the bottom, is that many of the best candidates for the road diets, the 4 to 3 lane conversions, are those that run already as a de facto 3 lane. There's enough left turn movements that people are basically forced to operate in the right hand lane. And the left-hand lane is basically, even though it's not marked as a left turn lane, but basically acts as a left turn lane. In this particular case, most of the traffic appears to be traveling through. They're not necessarily turning off within that corridor. So it really runs, to say efficiently now, that's not a qualitative term by any means. It's just a qualitative term, saying that it runs efficiently. So as it was otherwise designed to operate as a 4-lane road, it actually accomplishes that very well and moves traffic very efficiently. And if it was, otherwise restricted, its capacity for total number of vehicles as it stands is actually very good because it actually utilizes both lanes to pass traffic, along the corridor. So just some quick summary. The warrants, the 2 intersections we looked at, were not met for either of them using, data collected for both vehicles and as well as pedestrian traffic. Speed doesn't otherwise seem as it has been presented to the engineering department to be a widespread problem. I thought one little tidbit, this came up in the Institute of Traffic Engineers journal for the month of March, that identified in collecting data relative to the effectiveness, success of a road diet. And interesting stuff, and this is actually in several different reports. Theirs is probably one of the more thorough as far as collecting data. Widespread is just saying that road diets are often attributed to reducing speeds and traffic calming, and they generally accomplish that. However, there's always the concern, and we couldn't say that. I can't say definitively that this would be the result, but otherwise just something interesting to point out is that what they've otherwise have found in several instances is that you can calm the traffic on the road that you apply the road diet, and many times the people that want to speed are going to find a way to speed, and they'll just find someplace else to do it. So if they're in a hurry, they're going to be in a hurry, and the road diet's not actually going to stop them from doing that. So for what it's worth, I thought that was kind of just an interesting thing. It seems to be rising to the attention of traffic engineers as far as how to assess these and evaluate these road diets after the fact to see if they truly are functioning as intended. And the idea that we are moving beyond the corridor to which that we're applying. And as far as left turn movements, like I said, they're otherwise considered low by traffic engineering standards. And I do write this point down, but definitely want to state a little bit about the operation efficiency. If it was reduced, would likely be the efficiency would be likely reduced. I wouldn't want to give anyone the indication that that means that it's going to take you minutes longer to get down the corridor or anything like that. That's not the instance. It is just, like I said, purely qualitative to say that the total capacity that highway then could take would be less, and how that's going to otherwise respond to it. And you're probably talking more in factor of seconds to get from one side to the other, with whatever sort of delays may respect, or seconds longer to get into traffic. Not any sort of widespread differential. So looking at the decision-making flow chart and identifying what it is and comparing this road as per its design, operationally we did not find any issues with it. So following the flow chart, I would actually identify that there are no problems, there's no self-evident problems to do that, and then thus taking that decision-making flow chart to no action. Moving on then to safety evaluation. So we looked at some of them. I just wanted to show some of the data we did before, the 5-year crash history, and then we'll look at some of the crash reduction potentials. If you were at the last public involvement meeting, I showed this slide here, and it just shows representation of the accidents that have happened over a 5-year time period. This would be 2012 to 2016, which at the time was the most recent 5-year data available. Just kind of shows that those accidents are generally spread out throughout the corridor. There were roughly 70 of them, And then if you remember too, my statements there, some of the information there in the lower left-hand corner, this is a pretty typical considered, accident rate for a basic urban, cross-section like this. So.
Scott, I
Yes.
think it's important when I talk about this. It says 3 vehicle versus bicycle.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I should point out, and I kind of use that just as a placeholder. It's really, the way it comes out in the traffic data when you get the summary of things, it actually calls it a petacycle, which really just represents anything that's a pedestrian or a bicycle. So in this big case, there's actually 2 individuals on bicycles that were in accidents and 1 individual on a skateboard that was involved in an accident for that. Then looking at this a little bit more, because we wanted to, again, identify, not just in very general terms, what could be helped out with the road diet, what the lane conversion could actually assist with and correct. So we want to look at more about incident type, because a lot of the research identifies that there are certain incident types that are correctable with road diet, and certain ones that really are not significantly, at least anyways, affected, by the road diet and more likely to just continue on more of a behavioral thing with people in their driving technique versus the road design itself. So this is always just kind of a summary, there showing that different colors represent different types of accidents. Again, you can kind of see they're generally spread out. Probably the one cluster would actually be on green, which I said, again, we're not really looking at it this time until we can sort out the state what's going on there, which is predominantly people just trying to enter into traffic and getting hit by someone. Whoops. Oh. So this is just a summary of the incident types to look at, and I did include there, since I showed it on the graphic there, so the top one includes the Green Avenue information, a total of 56 accidents that recorded over that 5-year time, by these types. So I said this number 56 slightly less than the 70 because it's looking at specific incident types and not necessarily all of them. Generally. The remainder of them would generally be considered to be accident types that would not otherwise be corrected with or addressed with the road data. Then the ones in the bottom, the 43 accidents then remain when Green Avenue is taken out of the equation. Those would be the ones that we would be looking at as far as, with the road diet and looking to see how they might address those. So then, with the summary of that, so we're looking at that crash reduction. And quite often, many of the road diets that are implemented, many of them are done on, the assumption that they're going to reduce vehicle accidents. And typically, in most cases, they accomplish that. Now we have to remember that these road diets are applied on, a lot of different, roadways, and most predominantly in urban areas, and roads not really unlike, what we always have. However, the number of crashes is, not always comparable, between those, as well, and how the roads operate. So each one is going to actually be a little bit different and should be looked at differently. The second point that I always have in here is some interesting information. There seems to be more of this sort of information coming out now that these lane conversions have been around for some time and people are starting to evaluate them, much like I was stating about the speeding factor and what's happening there. More of these as time has gone by. And in some cases it was people saw an instant reduction to see things kind of come back up. Some of them have stayed down nice and low. Some of them have identified, and really what's come out of this for the most part is I'll jump to the bottom, is that again there are just certain types that seem to be more correctable with road diets versus others, which seem to kind of maybe stay the same. But there seems to be a lot of variability, and it seems to be very unique to each situation as far as what can be expected to do that. So this Michigan State University report they looked quite a bit at that. They came up with a crash modification factor is really just a multiplier. Take the number of crashes. If there were 100 crashes, and you had a CMF of 0.91, you just simply multiply 100 by 0.91, and you would get 91 crashes. So after you apply this road diet, they would assume that instead of 100 crashes, you would then reduce it by 9, and you'd have 91. So that's what the CMF is. And that generally supports even what the federal highways come up and what has been many referenced in many other guides, many other brochures and publications, and even provided by the Federal Highway Commission or Federal Highway Administration. I'm sorry. Is this variation of really what they can do, which is really what then brought the engineering staff itself to kind of look at how this might work. So if we just applied those general guidelines, we would be looking at a 1 to 2 accident reduction per year if we applied the road diet. However, I really wanted to look at this a little bit further to see what we have and how it might apply. So we looked at these other ways, rear ends, left wheels, and the side swipes a little bit more. The most prominent of which, as far as reductions looking at road diets, is usually the rear end. If you've got 4 lanes of traffic and you have a lot of people making left-hand turns, you have a lot of stop traffic in the left-hand lane, and people will often rear end them. Then if you start to move traffic, you don't know which lane it is, then people are making right turns, you can have the same thing. But really, it's the left turn, rear end crashes that the road diet corrects. That's the most prominent accident type that it addresses. It moves the people from a travel lane into the twiddle or a dedicated turn lane and gets them out of the traffic lane so that they can safely then make the turn without being worried about the rear end. What's really coming out in a lot of the data these days, and identified here in this Protected Transportation Center report, is identified that in low, learning why I said earlier before that it's important to understand that this is low and left turn movements are important, that often they can actually see an increase in these conflicts or very little in these conflicts, so there really just aren't that many occurring anyways. And if you really take that to its even logical conclusion, we wouldn't expect that they would wipe out anyone. No one has ever applied a road diet and said we expect to eliminate all crashes. It's a reduction in crashes. When we otherwise had 7 here over the last 5 years, it's still reasonable to believe we're going to have 1 or 2. Really, we're going to remain on par with where we are at the moment. Looking at left turn crashes, road diets, because they take people from the turn lanes, outliers opposed, use the term negative offset, which just means that the vehicles, that they're opposing vehicles turning that are kind of separated from each other. So you're actually looking beyond the vehicle to see traffic moving on the other side, and this actually puts them with the twiddle. Now they're in the center, so opposing left-turning vehicles are actually facing each other, so they're basically neutral within there. So it's more easy from the driver's side to see beyond their car and see what's happening in the lane to their side. With this again, very much so the same situation is that we would reduce is, we realize we're not going to be able to eliminate all of them. With this and too, so even if we assume again on the minimum of just 1 to 2 per year, we're probably still, in the likelihood of where we are, which is over the last 10 years, in the last 5 years, 10 of them occurred. So we may see a slight reduction there, but again, we're talking about such low numbers, it becomes very difficult to get any statistical, evaluation to get some confidence within those numbers to know really what would indeed happen. So I can't stand up and tell you exactly what's going to happen with this, as much as I'd like to. Side swipes, the last type that's really otherwise identified to be correctable with the most correctable with the road diet, usually as a result of things people changing lanes as they're trying to get around traffic, as it's either turning right or left. Like, so you have 2 lanes of traffic, people will make those maneuvers necessary without looking to see what's happening, and then they'll sideswipe the person traveling next to them. So theoretically, of course, by reducing the lanes, we should be able to, this is one many people would think that we'd eliminate. However, really, much of the research indicates once again that it can't otherwise be eliminated. Because often what happens in these sorts of cases is that you replace some of those, a certain amount of those side swipes, which you could call are eliminated, are then replaced by a different type, which just usually occurs with conflicts that then happen within the twiddle. This could be an instance where 2 people are trying to get to their driveway on opposite sides of the road or the same side of the road and don't realize what each other is doing and try to take the same space at the same time. Those sorts of things. Oh, thank you. Over the last 5 years, there were 4 side swipes as recorded, so the numbers are otherwise, still very low as it is. Again, we're probably not going to eliminate it. Even if we assume that we had just 1 year, we'd probably still be on par with where we are today. So, all that said, summary, the crash rates, are generally pretty typical for a cross-section of its type, and usage, generally low. Using even generally acceptable guidelines, we'd be looking at 1, maybe 2 accident reductions per year. However, when looked at it by incident type, it's very uncertain that we would actually reduce those accidents, and just think that they're probably very similar to where they are today. So taking that again and looking at the data and identifying that to see that while we'd really be nice to just eliminate all accidents, we realize that that's as much as we can try. Not always going to happen. There is not an excessive number of accidents within this corridor to begin with to think that we could make an appreciable difference in those accidents. So once again, I don't identify, and the staff and we don't identify that there is really a safety problem out there. Outside and beyond, I think we all hope that we could eliminate them, entirely. But the road diet isn't guaranteed to do that. Then we have other considerations, and this actually starts to get a little bit necessary even beyond the engineering, but it is definitely a consideration that needs to be thought of. This is less into the qualitative and more into the quantitative measures of things. But bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. These were some things that, quite honestly, in 1993 weren't really considered so much of that. We've really been considering much more recently. In the past few years, traffic engineers, city planners, and things like that, think much more about these things and incorporating them, into our corridors, into our roads. The road diet, just by eliminating one of the length of travel in each direction, then provides room to to accommodate this and to identify what really is, being recommended. If anything, we would reference the Portage County Bike and Pedestrian Plan. Another thing that a lot of people may not think about, but is accomplishable using the road diet, the lane conversion, is since you're taking up space, you're using less of the roadway that otherwise exists, the 4 to 3, is places for aesthetics, landscaping, planting trees, medians, things like that. And although it may kind of seem silly, why would we do that? There are some actual very scientific studies that show that these are traffic calming sort of measures, and they can reduce the speed, give people a place of being. They're less likely then to just kind of space out and pass on. They're usually more attentive to where they're driving when they go through these. So these are important considerations. Now what others can kind of be debatable, and I expect someone will probably stand up here and maybe tell me I'm wrong, and that's fine. Is that often these are used as these are the benefits of applying and implementing the road diet. You implement the road diet. If you found a problem, you correct it, and add the operations and the safety. You correct it. Now you have the opportunity to do some of these other things and gain something more. But they can actually be, in all honesty, they can be the deciding factor to implement a road diet or do something like this as an improvement. So looking quickly just at the Portage County plan, and I don't have my lovely assistant, so I'll point this out quick. Here's Stanley Street, the red dash line there, and in the bike and ped plan, this is that line designation, and the improvement plan is actually calls out for marked bicycle lanes. So the others taking that into consideration. So that is the facility type recommended there to put in bicycle lanes. And there's no another note to say that. I think a lot of people have heard is that maybe not be a lot of bikes now. If you put that on there, you could either see an increase in bicycle traffic. And whether that'll happen, I can't say for sure, but it definitely seems plausible. However, and I'll have to explain this one. This is the complicated part of the presentation, so stick with me. As I was looking at that, are there other issues I have to otherwise identify? Yes, we can definitely do something else with that. As far as looking at bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, things are they road diet correctable? And they are. By doing the road diet, we can actually add the bicycle lanes in. So now while following this through, doing the in-depth evaluation, road diet recommended. And this is where I think people could come up and argue with me. I always point to no, and I actually circled the boxes for other alternative or no action to think really I could send that line right back to more in-depth evaluation to identify really what do we want to do, because this becomes part of maybe some other larger decisions. Like I mentioned at the beginning, what do we otherwise want to do? What other factors may there otherwise be? However, I'm drawing this line to say that, and I'm pointing to no, and I guess I want to go there. So this next slide hopefully explains that a little bit more, at least the thought process that staff and I always had in coming up with that. And I think it's really important because there are no less than 3 places within the bicycle and ped plan that reference something similar to this statement here. Acknowledged by the authors that the most cost-effective way to implement bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure is by adding them to the scope of other capital projects. And I do think it's important. I spent many years in the private sector doing planning, and this is something that I would, in some means, or other wording that would include in every plan that I put together. Because it is important, because financial constraints from any community are one of the biggest constraints that we otherwise have for something. So trying to stretch your dollar is always a big thing. It needs to be given consideration and weight with any decision made. So looking at that, since if we identify, and if everyone can agree with, and not, maybe you don't, that there are no correctable or safety problems, at least self-evident ones through the analysis to do that this would otherwise create this as its own project. And while otherwise could be its own project, now we others need to evaluate, what is correctable, what are we trying to otherwise do, and I would otherwise state that should be otherwise based upon a documented need. And those sorts of things like driver conflicts, we get reports of drivers identifying, please get those bikes off the road before someone gets hurt. That to me is a cue to say something needs to be done. We just know that there's a large volume of traffic, their bicycle traffic using it already, and they don't have facilities dedicated to them for their own safety. We need to do something. If there was a crash history, now we do have a couple of bikes. Looking at those very specific instances of reports, bicycle lanes I don't think would have addressed either one of those instances that have happened in those last 5 years. And as well as just if the businesses in the area identify a need and want to petition to the city to say, we really feel that this would be an economical benefit to us, and we think that putting in bicycle lanes to do that, I would actually ask them to do that if that's something that they truly feel is necessary, or if the residents themselves in the area identify that they feel that there is a need for something like that, just like anything, whether it's has to do with Stanley Street or, quite honestly, whether there's anything to do within the city, if you can otherwise that, address it, bring it to us, and try to, get people together, to identify those needs and let us know what it is that you feel you otherwise need and want us to look at. However, I don't have a lengthy history of that, and I've talked to the previous director about that to see if maybe there was something I was missing in here. He told me that everything was in the file, and if it wasn't there, it wasn't known at least. So I don't really have that long history to do that, and if it exists, and I apologize, but I don't see that there's otherwise there to move that forward. So the last statement I have here says, while it's important that bike facilities help everyone to realize that bicycle safety, pedestrian safety, those other things versus just moving vehicles up and down the road, is important. But I do others think that we should just consider and look at this as that bicycle addition, just the facilities, should maybe be considered one part of a larger project. So then moving on to the recommended improvements, no one's fallen asleep, which I really appreciate. So what I was looking at, and I'll kind of go through this, if you're at the last PM, we realized that we kind of broke the road up into different segments based upon its width and kind of what could accommodate that. So one of the first things I was going to look at is that section there between Fremont and Michigan. So this is the area over by the hospital. And what I always do that is identify that based on its functional classification. Every road is given a functional classification based upon traffic volumes and its intent of use. And as far as then also its traffic volume is that road has no, since at least the last time it was seal coated, it has no pavement markings, and it really should be. The guidance otherwise identifies that it should have pavement markings. So I would actually recommend that we should follow through on that. That's something that should otherwise be done, should have been done a long time ago. And I actually do like the idea of using the twiddle there. I think there's many benefits between the traffic that happens in Illinois as well as just providing a dedicated lane for the hospital. There's plenty of left-hand turn movements there, especially considering the relative the ratio of the volume of traffic versus say in other areas of that corridor. There are some things that would otherwise happen as a result of that. One, it would eliminate all parking on both sides, just due to the width of the road. Right now, there's restricted parking between 8 and 4, I believe, and then it's free thereafter, except for, of course, the overnight. But we said it would provide a dedicated turn lane, would establish lane positioning. Because one of the things that it in other words does, I think if you use that corridor and you've come in from that way, you get to Michigan as you're traveling eastbound, and you're not necessarily sure really where to go. And I'll tell you quite honestly, that is a single lane. So those of you that are always pulling up alongside each other, it's no to do that. So what we can always do with this is use that to paint that to give people lane position, so we can then establish a turn lane, versus a through and right lane. So there's truly a benefit, doing that. Now the other drawback to it is that again, as I showed on there, the red line and the bicycle and pedestrian plans, due to the width of the road, if we incorporate the twiddle in the driving lanes, there isn't room to put dedicated bicycle lanes there, so we then have to use the sharrows, as they're otherwise called, just to indicate that the bicycle presence is otherwise allowed there and expected there to make people aware. So that would always be a change. It would have to be a deviation from the bike and ped plan. And so this is really what it would otherwise look like. Again, as just kind of a cross section, the typical cross section for that street. One lane in each direction, basically coming from the curb, and then the twiddle, the two-way left turn lane in the center. So then additional recommendations moving beyond that from Michigan towards Clayton. Really, our recommendation, we've sat through it, talked to staff. The engineering department has identified that we would just maintain the existing pavement markings there. However, we would evaluate the installation of a crosswalk at Clayton Avenue. There's not necessarily a lot of pedestrian traffic there, but I think there's enough pedestrian traffic there that we should at least give it a look to make sure that there is a facility there to make drivers aware that pedestrians may be in the road, that they're there, as well as just draw pedestrians to it, provide them a safe place to cross. And so that would look just like you otherwise would see it today, with 2 lanes in each direction. And moving yet further to the east, again, the recommendations would identify that we would maintain the existing pavement markings from Clayton to North Court, which is really the end of where we were looking to go with this at the moment. However, we would like to evaluate the installation of potential pedestrian hybrid beacon, which the picture otherwise illustrates here, somewhere near Minnesota Avenue, where there is a fair amount of pedestrian traffic. The beacon would definitely help pedestrians as well as bicyclists crossing as pedestrians to cross without the vehicle conflict. This is slightly different, although it could even be replaced if you want to, if everyone's familiar with that, Franklin Street, the RRFB, the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. Two that are otherwise there. This would be In my opinion, this is actually a safer alternative. It is a more costly alternative to that. If you can actually see from the picture, and I'll step away from the microphone briefly, is pointing there to the lights, there'd actually be a light then over each lane, each travel lane, has its separate lights to indicate where it is. So it operates much like a traffic light, a traffic signal. The bottom, as you can see there, is yellow. So in this case, an individual has pressed the button, and we're kind of in a waiting cycle. They still have a don't walk signal at the moment, but it's indicating to traffic, if you can safely stop, stop. If you can't, proceed. Then above that are actually 2 red lights above each of those yellow lights. And what always happens after the yellow light exhausts, the 2 red lights come on. And just like a stop light, traffic light, you're required to stop. So now you're waiting for traffic. Now they have the walk signal and they can proceed to walk. Eventually they'll get the flashing don't walk sign, which just indicates to anyone approaching the curb to remain on the curb for the next cycle. If you're in the crosswalk, to please continue to finish. At that point in time, or somewhere in there, those red lights start to alternate flashing like you would have at, let's say, a railroad crossing. And in other words, that the flashing red light then allows you to do a stop and go. So now you're required to stop. However, if there's no pedestrian in the crosswalk, you can go. So it just proceeds through that cycle when it's otherwise depressed. So you have to follow the traffic. So instead of looking for something necessary on the side, flashing white lights, this works much like a traffic signal. And it is, honestly, a safer, alternative to the RFB, but like I said, a slightly more costly alternative. And so this would otherwise look the same way too, remaining the pavement markings, 2 lanes in each direction. However, before I otherwise leave, and I am wrapping things up, this is the second to last slide, but could the lane conversion work? Some people are wondering that. And absolutely. All indications are that the 4-to-3 lane conversion, could function adequately. Like I said before, there could be and I said, it's qualitative, loss of efficiency. And I don't want anyone to get the idea that that means that, it's just going to be gridlock. That's not the case. Rather, just looking at, what's the capacity necessary of the road, how does it otherwise function? It actually functions very efficiently. So there would be a loss of efficiency. Like I say, but we don't have, unfortunately, the city doesn't have modeling software. I couldn't tell you or give you any indications of potential delay times or whatever that would be or what that efficiency loss would be, other than just to say that there would be. Looking at that, we would otherwise create, like I said, here just try to state that and reiterate that. Delays would be, not minutes, we're talking about seconds, of otherwise potential delay. And also with that, because now you have changed the geometry of the road, we did rerun those signal warrants to see what they're there, and why they do kind of rise more to the point of signals warning, they still don't pass any of the warrants. So, in doing so, wouldn't drive us to do any other improvements. So standing alone, if the road diet was done, or completed, it wouldn't drive us to, have to then do anything, further. We wouldn't have to add, additional signals or do anything else with that. It would work. So just otherwise, therefore, if you just go by, if there's some other factors, wouldn't that go beyond the engineering to do this, the lane conversion, could be implemented to accomplish that. And then one final note, just otherwise for everyone here, is if you were at the, speaking more of the roundabout, but this is at Stanley Street, we did get approval from the DOT to close off the ramp for division throughout the summer. During that there will be temporary signals then installed at Green Avenue that we will see. They should, once we get the contract coming in, we should see those. I would hope that maybe if people otherwise utilize those, if you go through the intersection, let my office know what you think about that. Just don't tell the DOT. There's no one from the DOT here, is there? Okay, good. I don't want to upset anyone there. Like I said, right now we're assuming they still own that intersection. Just to see, how does that function? I'd really like to get people's feedback, and I think even people crossing there are going to see a difference because there's going to be signals there. But just the what's called the tuning effect. If traffic coming through on Stanley is required to stop, then downstream of that, as others have it, there's going to be gaps that others can create. Now those gaps eventually fill in. It only goes so long, but that's somewhat dependent on traffic patterns and stuff like that. But people should see an improvement downstream of that to some extent. As they're getting there, especially for people trying to cross or enter into traffic, they should be able to see some improvement. So, not saying this isn't on, our drawing board now as far as the decision to do that, but I just want to let everybody know. I said definitely if you go through there, let us know how you feel those function. Now, mind you, those are going to be temporary lights, so they're not going to have all the bells and whistles as far as, the loops and things like that. They're going to be just pre-programmed, run on a program and all, but just so you otherwise aware, and that should hopefully have some positive impact on the corridor downstream. So with that, I guess we're to the comments and feedback. Hopefully I didn't work.
some of the changes that we talked about do work in some places. I'm not sure what problems they're solving, but they do work in some places. They don't work in others. We needed to find out what your concerns were. That's why we had those first 2 meetings. And take that and then collect data on our end. Our individual road is unique in a lot of ways. So the data that we have is collected over a certain period of time, trying to get the biggest, broadest data collection source that we can. The accident data, that happens as well. We did that over the 5-year period to try and get the broadest spectrum that we could. Now someone could say, well, you didn't collect speed data on Saturday afternoon, or you didn't collect it at 2 o'clock on a Thursday. You're right, we didn't. We tried to get the best data that we could, making sure we had the peak times during the week when people are coming into work or going home from work, when school is in session, and try and collect that data as best we can. The evidence here, the data, points to some conclusions that our engineers, the Department of Transportation, have set as standards. Does that mean we can't do anything? No, it doesn't. The data doesn't necessarily support it, but we can still make improvements. And that's why I said we're going to have this presented to council for something at the request of a few of the alderpersons for consideration sometime before mid-May. The alderpersons, those 11 people, can vote to do anything that's allowed without jeopardizing safety. They can put signals in, we can put the crossing beacons in, we can restripe the entire stretch. Those things are going to be up to the alders to find out what their decision is based on the information that they have here and the feedback that you provide. One of the ideas that we could do if bicycle accommodations is the key for some people. The bicycles, and I want to be clear on this because I get addressed this all the time. Bicycles have the right to be on any road in the city right now and use the full lane of traffic. When they're on the road, they should be operating as a vehicle following the rules of the road. Lights, signals, stopping at stop signs, those sorts of things. So they can do that right now. The bike markings that you see on Buchholz and Prentice are only a reminder to drivers and pedestrians and bicyclists that they have that right. Now some people have said, well, bicyclists don't stop at stop signs and this and that. Some of them don't, but I'm guessing, and I'm going to take a really broad stroke here, that everyone in this room who drives a vehicle has probably exceeded the speed limit at one time in their lives. It happens. But don't judge a whole group by the actions of a few. And that would hold true for anything you deal with in life. So again, the bicyclists have that right now. And maybe a solution would be to better identify a share row on the right lane of each lane of traffic. Then the vehicles could know that if there's a bicycle in that lane, move over to the next one. That's an option. Putting up a four-way stop is an option. The data doesn't support some of that, but we can still do that. So before we get into the alders and then testimony, does anybody have any questions for our engineer and director? Yes, sir. I'm going to need you to come up to the microphone, I think, because, or can I bring it over there, maybe, Sarah? Does that work? I don't want to get feedback.
My name is Alex Nitter. I have a laundromat on Highway or Stanley Street. Now, come at 7:30 in the morning when I'm coming to work, there's 2 lanes of traffic coming into town. And you're suggesting we make a 1 lane? How would people trying to get on Stanley Street going to work, get on there with all the traffic from 2 lanes to 1 coming into work?
Okay, and that's a very good question. I assume it's rhetorical, but here's what I want. Rather than providing testimony, because the director's been talking for almost an hour now, I just want questions. If there are questions that anyone in the audience has specifically regarding the presentation, after that, then we'll open it up to testimony. Are there any questions relating to the data? Yes, sir. I need you to come up front, please.
I think I can speak loud enough.
You can't.
Okay. I just have one.
I just want to make sure every single person who wants to watch this online has as clear of an audio as they can possibly get.
Bob Ostrowski, 516 Michigan. My question for you is, you're talking about that overhead flashing light. Is that similar to the light we now have installed on Division Street by the fire station? But this one would be covering each lane, correct?
Yes.
Yes, it would provide the same functionality. It would otherwise be a little different. Instead of just the rapid flashing white lights that we otherwise see there, this would actually use a combination of yellow and red, you know, to indicate exactly what the vehicle is supposed to do. The state law, otherwise, as far as requires with the rapid flashing beacons, if there's someone in the crosswalk, you need to yield, you know, to that individual, but you don't necessarily know exactly what's going on. The lights above each lane indicates in that lane to a vehicle, to the operator of the vehicle, exactly what they are required to do, whether it is to stop or whether it is stop and then proceed. You know, so it eliminates any of those potential questions of looking to your neighbor to find out, are you going, should I be going? So it's definitely going to step up from that, but it is intended for the same reason.
Okay, Scott, I'm going to give you 30 seconds or so to move the laptop, just in case anybody needs to have something specific that they want to bring up here. Turn this on. And, I'm sorry, question, sir?
My name is Tyler Shea, 2625 Stanley Street. When you guys did the counts for the traffic, was there counts for bikes that were going back and forth on Stanley Street?
Not individually. Bikes traveling on the roadway are considered vehicles at the time of travel, so they were just counted as another car, essentially going. The bike counts are pretty low. There are some.
Little average.
Joe, do you want to come up here, Joe, and use the microphone?
Yeah, so like I was saying, when a bicycle is traveling down the lane on the road, as part of the count, they'd be counted as a vehicle. We did not take specific bicycle counts as we were doing them. There are some, but
Should we be counting those bikes too and making sure we are having enough bike traffic as we have with cars?
that'd be correct.
Yeah, and that's not a question we can answer tonight. Yes, we could count the number of bikes. Yes, we could count the number of pedestrians. Yes, we could count the number of skateboarders. I think there's enough studies out there that generally speaking, we know approximately a percentage of the population that uses a bike. I do, not very often, as you can probably tell. But I do have a motorcycle, so I share some of the pain. I know that cars don't always watch what they're doing. They're not always as courteous as we would hope, and I probably am guilty of that as well. So yes, we could do some bicycle counts. I don't know that it would change any of the data here regarding what we need to do on the road. We're looking at speed and traffic counts, accidents, things like that. So I don't know that it would change this data, but yeah, we could do that. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up, as I said before, there are 3 alders that Stanley Street has as a piece of their district. Alderperson David Shore couldn't be here, but he had put an opinion piece in the paper, so you can find that online. And I will bring up Alderperson Sean Morrow, who's got a small portion of that, and then we'll have Alderperson Kathy Dugan.
I have a very small. My name is Sean Morrow. I represent the 11th area. One thing that I was very happy to hear about is that there is going to be light at Green and North Point, because I know when I try to go to work at 7:30, it's very, very busy, and I often have to often make a right and then turn around to get going out to end up getting on the highway myself. That's very frustrating for me as well. I know for the past 2 years I've talked to folks in my area. Some of them I see here, some of them are for it, some of them don't want it. One of the questions that I have for Director Badun is, what's the projected cost of this?
Well, and that's not a question that we can answer as well, because we don't know what this is yet.
All right.
So if you want to speak to some of the costs that would be associated with some of the possible options?
I don't have, there was something, because we decided really what it is we're going to do. A couple things that was mentioned is, well, what was always included in the budget for this year for improvements was $45,000. Recently looking at what we've been recommending in those sorts of things, the striping pavement markings between Michigan and Fremont, we'd estimate roughly would cost about $30,000 alone. So it is a fair amount of cost there. And that's like I said, just budgetary estimates. Hopefully it would come in lower, but I feel really comfortable with that number. A pedestrian beacon is probably between $50,000 and $60,000 if we wanted to go to something like that. Like I said, that at this point in time, we're just looking to see that probably requires a little more evaluation. So we necessarily can't stretch this out too far with the budget that we have.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, one last thing is, before this actually goes to council as well, and in the last few years when I thought this was going to be coming to a vote, I'll also be going out to all of your homes, doing a walk around to see what everybody thinks, because I know a lot of folks might not have been able to come here to our day. I do recognize some of the faces here. I know there's probably a lot of others that weren't able to make it and may not have seen the letter and so on. But I do plan on going out to everybody's house that's on this street.
Thank you. Okay, Alderperson Kathy Dugan, 8th District.
My voice isn't big, so if you need it to go louder, tell me. I want to say two things. Well, more than that. Yes, that's right. It's great to see so many of you here. It's good that we'll have your input in a moment. And I want to encourage you, if you weren't able to see the PowerPoint very well, it was hard from back there. And if you weren't able to really understand everything that Director Badun said, please go online and take a look, because he gave us an amazing presentation of all the data, and it says a lot, as well as the possibilities, the probabilities and the possibilities. So it's a lot to take in. 1 hour of presentation. So please go back and look at that if you have some questions. The other things I wanted to say, just two things that constituents in District 8 have brought up to me. One is from a woman who lives with her husband on Sault Marie. Now, District 8 goes from Sault Marie on the east side, District 2 is on the other side, all the way out, as many of you know, to the airport and even out to Burlosky Road and so on. It's a big ranging area. But she said to me, when I or my husband and my grandchildren come to town too, we like to go over to Schmeekley. And it's very, very difficult to get across. Well, I expect that she's using Minnesota. She will be happy to hear that we're considering something to aid her in that area. Of course, she said, let people know that I would be in favor of the road diet or the lane conversion, and she probably would. She's also a bicyclist. A long-distance bicyclist, and would be probably happy with bike lanes. Another person I saw at a Stanley-related meeting last evening, and I see a few of you who were there, but I don't see her. She said, if you're going to talk about the lane conversion, she said, I'm a visual person. I simply can't imagine what that would be like, what it would look like, how people would travel on it. And I said, I'm the same. It's hard to visualize, which led to, it would be good if we could all take a road trip ourselves and go to Wausau, for instance, and see Thomas Street. And that's kind of a lead-in, I hope, to President Johnson's discussion, because she travels Thomas almost every day. And that hasn't changed, as some of you may know, from 4-lane to a 3-lane with that, twiddling in the middle. But the constituent last night said, I just can't imagine it. And it is difficult. It's very difficult to imagine that it would help in any way. But we have all kinds of information now about how it can help or how it wouldn't help or how it will just be neutral. And then I recommend that if this conversation continues, that you do go to some place like Wausau and take a look at that and see how it operates up there. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. President Johnson, did you want to say some comments, or do you want to save them to the end?
I will allow the residents to speak first, and then I'll just wrap up what I have here. But
Okay.
mine won't be long. I'll let them speak first.
Thank you. Again, we're going to allow public comments now. I would ask that you come on up to the podium. Clearly state your name and address so we have a record of that. And then give your testimony. I would ask that, again, be courteous of everybody else that's here, and limit your comments to briefly as you can. Let's try and keep everything under 5 minutes. Hopefully it's not even that long. But we want to make sure that you get a chance to get out your thoughts. We're going to allow anyone who lives on Stanley Street to speak first, then anyone who lives within a block of Stanley Street next, and then finally everyone else, and then we'll close with President Johnson from the City Council. Anyone living on Stanley Street that wishes to speak? Come on.
My name is Dave Wysocki. I don't live on Stanley Street, but I operate a business on Stanley Street at 2740 Stanley Street. I'm right at the intersection of Minnesota and Stanley Street. I've talked to a couple other people as the presentation went on. Kind of like the idea of the lights. There's an issue at Minnesota and Stanley Street. The bike lane thing, you're inconveniencing 12,000 cars a day to maybe convenience 15 or 20 more bikes on a good day. That doesn't make sense to me. The safety issue and speed issue, I think maybe we have a resolution or something that's real close at that Minnesota intersection. And enforcement on Stanley Street. The cop shop's right on the corner. I've said this at other meetings. I've been involved in all these meetings, even the ones that were advertised as city meetings that weren't. We had flashing lights there in October of 16. Your speed is. It's amazing how the cars slowed down. A little bit of enforcement slows the speed down. That's really the goal. If that's the goal, I think we've got a very close to a resolution. I don't like other personal agendas that are, and I'll leave it at that. But go on record as being against the bike lanes, something at Minnesota, something that controls the speed a little bit. And Stanley Street's going to be fine. Remember, Stanley Street is a major inflow and outflow to the city. And if we reduce that, what are we going to have? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on Stanley Street?
Hi, I'm Jack Ernest. I'm on 2517 Stanley Street. My driveway's on Clayton Street. I have no problems making left and right turns, but I do have a problem trying to turn left on Stanley Street to go to Clayton. That's because there's a bar across the street, Partners, and they got a parking lot right there on the west side. Seems like every time I want to turn in, they want to turn into the parking lot. So we're sitting there blocking each other so we can't turn in. Now, I see when you guys want to change that to that diet road or whatever, I see we're going to have a lot of issues there. People ain't going to want to give. You're going to have people facing each other. Like, you got a house on this side and a house on this side, but the guy wants to turn this way, his driveway's up that way. The guy wants to turn to the opposite, his is going to be a little further down. What they going to do? Kind of pull back out and let it go around maybe? And I mean, the driveways ain't that far apart. Bicycles? We don't want it. Last two meetings I was at, everybody said no. We don't want the bicycles. It's not safe. Would you trust your child going down that road? A little kid going down that road, even though it's 3 lanes? You know, there's a lot of college kids that are not from Wisconsin. They might be from, you know, they drive a little different than we do. It's not safe. We say the biggest problems that we hear is that we need to put lights up. At least 2 of them. One over by Quick Trip, and one over there by Minnesota. They do need them there. And my question would be, why are we keep bringing this up? This is the second time we was here. Third. Well, this is third now. And the last 2 times, everybody that lives on Stanley Street said no. We don't want the bicycle. But that's all we hear about. They want bicycle lanes here. And I sit at the house, I see 3 bikes in the morning. That was all. And they drive down my sidewalk, which I don't mind. Just 3 bikes is all I see. And I can't see narrowing down the road because of 3 bikes. Then if you do put that in there, are they going to have anybody heading east on the south side of the road, everybody heading west on the north side of the road? Or are they going to face each other and cause a problem? You know what I'm saying? That's an issue. You know, you're going to be only 5 feet, but if you got 2 people riding down one side and somebody's coming down this way on a bike, there's a problem. And how about the trash trucks? What are we going to do about the trash trucks if you're going to have bicycle lanes there? They're going to try to go around them. They're going to pull out somebody that ain't paying attention. Because, you know, you're trying to watch everybody else. You can't be watching them. There was another one up here I wanted to say. The biggest part I see where there's more accidents at almost was M1 isn't on them 2 blocks I mentioned. It's actually a little further up, right there where Scafitti's exit's at. And Honda, that road there, there's a lot that's coming from the university or from the Century that don't pay attention. They try to either pull out in front of you. Actually, I was heading north, or I was heading east. And I had one guy pull out from Scafitti's, one in across the street, and I had one that pulled out from the Honda place. And they forced me to stop, which the roads were icy. Then they flipped me off because I honked my horn out. I mean, you know, everybody I talk to, even my next door neighbor, she's 80-something years old. She pulls out from Clayton Street, makes a left-hand turn, no problem. And she lived there way longer than I did. I lived there in this house for 20 years. Had no problem, except now. Because they want to put bicycle lane in. Why do they want to put a bicycle lane? That's what I want to know. Lights, yes. Bicycle lanes, no. Traffic comes in heavy. You're going to narrow that down to 1 lane? It's going to cause more problems. Especially when you get the guys in the middle wanting to turn at the same time in different directions, but they're in the way. I see nothing but problems there.
Thank you, Jack.
This is creating a big problem.
Thank you. Sir, up front here, and then we'll get to the one in the back.
Mark Goldsley, I live at 3000 Stanley Street, which is on the north side, right across from Sue Marie. And I wouldn't support the lane conversion either, because in the morning when I head to work, and I actually work at Scaffitti, and the biggest problem I see on Stanley Street is at Green Avenue, period. Because I actually take East Sue Marie, which is the road that goes by Maury's Bar, to go to work and to come back to my house, because I've been working there for 15 years and I will not go to that intersection anymore. It ain't worth it, just like he just said. It's constantly busy. And I think if they have a stop and go light there, it'll slow traffic down further down the road, and then one at Minnesota too. I think that would drastically solve the problem. And as far as pulling out in the morning or coming back from work at night, you know, when it's busy traffic time, the morning sometimes I could pull out to my driveway and I might be sitting there for a minute, 30 seconds, whatever, because the traffic is heavy coming in between 7 and 8:30. So if you reduce that down to 1 lane, I might be sitting there for 2 minutes, which, whatever, I mean, yeah, that's fine, but it's functions good the way it is, in my opinion. And then the other big thing is, like you mentioned, the garbage trucks, the mailman. That's another issue that I see, or FedEx or UPS. Cause they'll be stopping in the one lane, so what's everybody gonna do? They're gonna go to the middle lane to go around them where everybody's just supposed to go there to turn left. And then also, obviously, the city bus is coming down there too, so people would, they'd be stopping on Stanley Street for the city bus, or the city stopping at the bus stop, so then people are just they're gonna use the left lane to go around them, or the middle lane, so, yep.
Okay, thank you. In the back?
My name is Tyler Shea, 2625 Stanley Street. I live right across from Partners Pump. Now, when I have to leave in the morning to take my son to school, I cannot go west. I have to go east and go all the way around, go past Cherokee, go all the way around. Sometimes we like to go west and get there quicker, but sometimes they're in a rush. Now, bicyclists, I hardly see anybody wearing a bike helmet on that street. That's safety, If you could be using the street, wear a bike helmet, pay the road taxes like everybody else has to do with their vehicles. I have a mailbox in front of my house. Very rare that many people on our street have a mailbox on the road. Now, the plow trucks, they can't knock this mailbox down. So what happens is, my view is blocked. I'm backing up. I can't see no bicyclist. How are we gonna fix this part? You got the, you got the mailboxes, you got the garbage, recycling, there's no way around it. We should keep everything the way it is and address Minnesota and green. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else on Stanley Street? Come on forward. Hang on 1 second, we'll get the lady up here first. It's all yours.
My name is Diane Struski. I live at 3328 Stanley Street for 34 years. I've seen the road go from 2-lane to 4-lane. Now they're talking 2-lane. I'm on the internet a lot, and some of you may have read my letters. There was a Metro Rail poll taken February 18th. For about 7 days it ran. They reached out to about 2,300 people. 437 people responded online. 364 were against the road diet, against the bicycle lanes. 73 were for it. 83% of the people don't want this. I decided, well, I wonder what the job of the council people and all the people is. So I went and I Googled that, and it said, among other things, a whole list of things. They decide on the budget, they decide on ordinances. The one that stuck out to me was they're the liaisons for the city and the people. We're the people. We just spoke. 83% of us just spoke. I don't know how in good conscience they could vote for this. They are here to represent us. I totally agree with this Minnesota thing. As far as those fancy lights over the top, I go through 5 days a week, rush hour, I'm at the Y. I go through that intersection with those. No one's confused. When someone pushes that button, they stop. All sides, 4 lanes of traffic. I don't know what the cost difference is, but they were great. I was really impressed with that. So then I went the other day and I had my nails done, and I'm talking to my nail technician who came here from Appleton, and he said he lived in the suburbs of Appleton. They did this bike lane thing, made it all fancy. He said he's driving down the road one day, he witnessed an accident where a man was driving with his family in the bike lane. The poor guy was hit by a vehicle and died right in front of his family. Okay, that's all I have to say.
Next.
Jackson Case, 3028 Stanley Street. Last time, or the last meeting that we had about this, I was at, and I kind of, at that time, felt a little bit, I don't know, not sure where I wanted to go, because I really wanted to know what the director was going to come up with. as far as the whole engineering process here. And I guess all I have to say is that I'm pretty much sold right now without a question that leaving it alone is absolutely fine, and there's no question about it. The engineering speaks to a situation that does not need taxpayer money to do anything to. It speaks to a situation that's absolutely fine if you just leave it alone and don't mess with it. As far as the whole bicycle thing, I think that was started in I don't know, for some reason other than what the people in the area want anyway. So I think it's just wonderful if we just leave it the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on Stanley Street? Yes, sir?
My name is Jeremy Nimchek. I'm sure some of you have seen my letters. And I was the person who got the signs made up. Very much against the road diet. I like Director Scott's idea. I had a 2.5-page speech I was going to let go, but I guess I don't need to anymore. But there's a quote in here that I think is very important from my alderman. I'm kind of blank here. But maybe it boils down to whether we think the streets should be tailored just to be used by cars, or whether walkers and bike riders should also be taken into account. That's a direct quote. I think that's the nuts and bolts of it right there. We hear stuff about safety, I'm not buying it. The director mentioned it could be seconds would be the difference in travel time. I don't know about you guys, but my whole life I've heard in an emergency seconds matter. That's a direct route from the hospital to the interstate. Seconds matter to me. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else living on Stanley Street? Yes, ma'am?
My name is Rachel. I don't live on Stanley, but I manage the BP gas station on the corner of Stanley and Minnesota. Basically, what I want to say, everybody else has said, I don't agree with doing this whole road diet thing. I have a bus stop that stops right in front of my station. If we do it to the 4-lane to the 3-lane, I already have enough traffic that flies through my parking lot, which is not safe. I've already had some issues with pumps being hit, and so if we make it smaller, I'm going to have more traffic flying through there. Again, safety at my end with running a business, so I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay. Anyone else who either lives or has a business on Stanley Street? Sir, are you coming up to speak? No? Just sick of listening to us, right? Anyone else who lives or owns a business on Stanley Street? Okay, then we're going to open it up to the next level, which is 1 block off, so a side street or 1 block away from Stanley Street. Is there anyone here that fits in that category? In the back, sir?
Don't call me so big,
You should hear what they call me sometimes.
yeah, I do. I wrote it.
Bob Worsbaugh. I own a building just off of Stanley Street. And I was at the last meeting also. The majority of the people that I heard at the last meeting weren't in favor of really changing a whole lot. I drive in and out from Rosholt, so it takes me a little longer to get into town than the rest of you. And a few people are going to roll their eyes and go, well, you choose to live up there. Yeah. And I also choose to have property near Stanley Street. It takes me 25 minutes to get into town. Under heavy traffic, it takes me 26 minutes. And in the evening when you're driving into the sunset, you can't see any of it. You put up a set of lights, you're still not going to see them when you're driving in the evening. Maybe you'll see them in the morning when you're driving out. My personal opinion on it is right now it works. Don't fix it. If you change it, then the second thing you have to do is retrain the drivers. I mean, you've got people that are 50, 60, 70 years old. I've been driving in and out of town on 66 since before I had a driver's license, and then they told me I had to get one. On a bike and in a car. And it's worked. I mean, it's worked since they made it a 4-lane. Changing it, you're going to start getting more accidents for a short amount of time, and then things may level out. But you have to retrain everybody else that's coming in and out. The people that aren't represented here today, which are the ones from Custer, from Ellis, from Polonia, from Rothschild, they're all using that highway on a daily basis also. They're coming in, they're bringing their families in and out to the businesses or to the hospital. Right now it's working. It could use a little bit of adjustment, but I don't think throwing a lot of money at the problem is going to change much. So mark me down as a leave it alone. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else just off of Stanley Street? Okay, then we're going to open it up to anyone else. Anyone else who has comments? That's even better. Nobody? Tori, you want to, either that or you can wait till the end. Being an alder person, I will afford you the opportunity to either do it now or wait till the end when. Yeah. Okay, you sir in the middle. Trying to remember my training. I'm not supposed to leave the lectern until the speaker comes.
Dan St. Peter, 408 Lennon.
I'm sorry, the name again?
Dan St. Peter.
Okay.
I'm relatively new to Stevens Point. I moved here a couple of years ago, so I like to try to get involved with the community as best I can. And one thing that I've noticed in going to the grocery store, going to the gym, seeing some comments on Facebook, there's a lot of people that seem to be very opposed to, this road diet thing, and myself included. I'm not opposed to some sort of a change, but I don't think a road diet is going to be the answer. Again, I don't think a lot of money needs to be thrown at this. That's really all I have to say about it. If there's any person that I think can make this happen, it's the general population, and it seems that everyone's kind of on the let's not do anything, so.
Thank you. Anyone else? In the back?
Hi there, my name is Lynn Schulist. I live at 408 Lennon Avenue, Stevens Point. I just wanted to bring up, how did we get here? I had a conversation with Mr. Badoon a few weeks ago, and I'm like, how did this all start? Was it receiving a ton of complaints from people? From how I understood it, based on our conversation, when there was discussion about doing a similar treatment to Division Street, and there was a lot of concern over that. I think your predecessor went to the consulting firm and said, are there any other areas of Stevens Point we could test this type of treatment in to see how it would work? Two options that came up were Stanley Street and North Point. I think where it happened, they kind of drew up this example and it kind of ballooned from there, and here we are. I like to think about what is the problem statement. I've heard this numerous times, and it was quoted in some of the local media. It's not about bikes, it's about safety. I think Mr. Badoon had addressed pretty clearly that this treatment of the road diet is not going to check the boxes for solving for safety issues. If it's about bike lanes, obviously that checks the box. One other thought, as I was trying to find examples or maybe more of an apples to apples comparison out on the World Wide Web, one other article I read brought up that even if you add an extra minute or two and you have about 9,000 cars a day, that increases extra emissions. And I know the council recently passed a resolution on carbon neutrality, so it feels like this is an important topic, and this would probably just add to that problem. Let's see here, I don't want to be repeating what anyone else had said. I did call the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. The individual I spoke with basically told me, hopefully, I don't know if I spoke to the wrong person or what, but they said that they don't necessarily have a road diet expert on staff. They did say that it works in some cases and not others, and that each corridor is evaluated and is unique, and it should be a case-by-case basis versus blanket statements. I do agree with some sort of crossing mechanism because that has been stated, even though the data doesn't show that it's needed necessarily. However, if there's that perception from people that it's dangerous, they're just not going to do it. So I would encourage the business owners to really think about that, and if that is something that's going to help your business with pedestrians crossing from one side of Stanley to another. I know $45,000 does not get us far these days when it comes to any type of road repairs or whatnot. But as I've been out and about the past few months, I've heard over and over and over again about potholes that need to be filled, maybe chip sealing, and to help make the roads more manageable. I don't know how far $45,000 will go, but that is another thought as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Same thing happens to me too. People say I'm out of shape, but every time I stand up, I'm squatting 280 pounds.
My name is Fred Kelkoven. I live at 910 Ridge Road, lived there over 30 years. I was born in this city. I lived here almost every day except for the time I was in the service. And I'll tell you, this isn't just about that bicycle path. There's things getting ignored in the city. Look at our streets. Drive down Church Street, it's ridiculous. And you come up with some other brainstorm like this bike thing, it doesn't make any sense. And to me, I've talked to some people. The people on the city council have been elected by us to represent us. People have commented that the city council is getting to be a good old boys club. And I'm concerned about it. And I've heard a lot of good comments. I never came to a meeting like this before, but glad I did.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last call? Okay, then we're going to move to the alders. Alderperson Jennings, or I guess it doesn't matter who was first. Alderperson Johnson.
I won't touch the mic because I know I always get in trouble when that happens. So for those of you that stay, you all get the gold star because it's been long and I appreciate your presence here. My name is Melissa Johnson. I am the alder for the 5th District. I'm also council president, and I'm very, very pleased to serve the city of Stevens Point and its citizens. First, I just want to comment that Alder Dugan had mentioned Thomas Street in Wausau, and indeed I travel that route quite frequently. I work in Marathon County. It was recently converted from a two-way street into a two-way street with outer bike corridor and inner vegetated medians with left turn lanes. That corridor is about 15,000 vehicles per day. It goes through not only an industrial area, but it also goes through a residential area with schools and churches. Excuse me. It is the main corridor off of 18th Street, which is coming off of the Red Mountain area, to the downtown, aside from Scott Street. It's County Road N. Interestingly, I always hated traveling that route, but when I'm down at River Drive for meetings to get back out to the interstate to come home, you got to go down Thomas Street. And it would be, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it would be a 10-minute journey from the river to 18th Street. The first time I traveled that corridor after this conversion, and it's a little more massive than what is being considered on Stanley Street. It was a 5-minute journey, and I was completed through that entire corridor. That entire corridor used to take me close to 10 minutes because of the congestion, left turn issues, pedestrians, bicyclists. It was really a challenge. So if you have a chance and you're in Wausau, if you know Thomas Street, which is County Road N, give it a look, see. It's a much more pleasant route than it was in the past. And I do travel Stanley Street on my way to work. My office is out at Highway 29 east of Wausau. And so I'm on Stanley Street every day, 5 days a week, to start my 45-mile journey to my office. So I know the challenges of navigating traffic there. I'm frequently behind the waste management truck that's always stopping at the one business near Minnesota. I wait patiently for them to do their job. What I wanted to share with you this evening is something that I found, like the last speaker. I did some research, and so I'm not an expert on this. I like to do my own research and hopefully get a little bit smarter, hopefully. The United States Department of Transportation Federal Highway Commission, or Administration, has an entire section on road diets, and what they've done is they've captured a lot of information from cities across the United States who have done this. Some of them are Manhattan, certainly not relative to Stevens Point. Seattle, Washington, maybe. But this one is from Des Moines, Iowa, and an avenue, it's called Ingersoll Avenue. This was called a temporary road diet, in other words, an experiment, a test plot, so to speak. Their objective was to calm traffic, improve pedestrian and bicycle access, and enhance the business environment. The features of this particular route it's a transit route, so the buses travel this corridor. It is a lot of commercial business, and there were community concerns about safety. The results of this was that there were a 50% reduction in crashes, and after the test, the pilot, the majority of people were in favor of it. This corridor carried about 11,000 to 17,000 vehicles a day, far more than what we have on Stanley Street. And I'd hate to see that many on Stanley. That would be a lot of traffic. But interestingly, there was a local newspaper called the City View, it's Central Iowa's Independent Weekly. And we've got a couple of those here in Stevens Point. And they tend to be local versus some of our chain newspapers, so to speak. And I'm going to read this. I beg your forgiveness. You've been here a long time. I haven't had my dinner, and I suspect some of you haven't either. It starts out, road diets make sense. Ingersoll fit. Makes Ingersoll fit. We were critical of the Des Moines City Council for its decision to approve the restriping of Ingersoll Avenue to change it from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, adding a bicycle lane and additional parking at taxpayer cost. At least 550 people who signed the petition agreed with us. Our concern with this often called Ingersoll Road Diet was that it would annoy motorists so much that they would avoid the area, hurting the businesses that needed the patronage. We feared the traffic congestion would switch to Grand Avenue, apparently a parallel road. We thought that change would result in increasing crashes, and we shook our head in disgust at the idea of further challenging Ingersoll business owners with financial pain. On all accounts, we were wrong. Our concerns proved to be unwarranted, as shown through an October report from the city's Traffic and Transportation Division and discussions we had with a handful of Ingersoll merchants. Average daily traffic on Ingersoll has not decreased or diverted away. In fact, traffic has increased slightly, and many merchants have noticed. The number of crashes has actually reduced. City leaders said this change would calm traffic. They were right. Like many of you, we frequent the Ingersoll area often, and traffic does seem to flow better. The traffic report did not include information on bicycle uses, as the primary goal of this change was not to have bicyclists use Ingersoll more. Even so, this will happen in time as bikers feel safe. So they feel, and there's a few more things, but they feel that mission was accomplished, and so it may seem this from the city's perspective. So I just wanted to share that with you. Change is hard, I understand that. So it's another perspective, and I found it quite interesting. Thank you for your time and sincerely for your patience.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't had supper yet either, and I'm wasting weight on nothing, as you can see. Alderperson Jennings? Well, before anybody leaves, please make sure that we get your name signed in. I want to make sure we get an accurate count of everybody who attended. Alderperson.
Hi, Tori Jennings, Alder for District 1. Here we are again, and here we are again without the Director of Community Development. And I'm not sure why we keep having these meetings without community development here, because streets are about economic development. The reason to invest in Stanley Street is about economic development as much as it is about improving access. Any 21st century city must look at all modes of transportation. Walking, biking, transit, placemaking are features of 21st century cities. Attracting millennials, our future workforce, means investing in lifestyle. That's what they're attracted to. Businesses and the jobs they bring are interested in moving to places where potential employees wish to live. For the purpose of economic development, our city should phase out all of its undivided 4-lane roadways. They do not conform to modern cities. Restriping Stanley is a high-return, low-cost investment. Now, the job of City Council is to set policy. We represent constituents, but we also represent the city. And I see someone shaking their head no. Yes, council sets policy. That is our job. Yes, it is. There are things we will not agree on, but council sometimes must make decisions that a few do not like for the benefit of the many. And I'm willing to do that. So thank you.
Okay, I think that exhausts all of the alders that we are. Gotta put the glasses on. Yep, so we are covered. All right, so once again, this meeting will be posted online as soon as we are able to. Maybe tomorrow, very likely Monday. The PowerPoint, we should be able to get it online tomorrow. So go to stevenspoint.com or our mobile app. And we will also try and maybe rebroadcast this on our radio station 105.9. Thank you all very much for coming. As a reminder, I promised the alders that we are going to bring this forward in some manner prior to the middle of May. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you very much again for coming. This is not an easy issue. There's no easy solution. We're going to do the best that we can with what we have. Everybody have a good Friday and happy Easter.